Good morning. My name is Pastor John Maruka, and we're here today in beautiful Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and we're going to be hearing from Ada Ohnezeit. Just celebrated her 100th birthday, and we're here to interview her and talk to her about what's been going on in the last 100 years of her life. Ada?
Well, do you want it year by year or month by month?
We don't want to be here all day.
We'll skip around a little, huh?
Yeah.
Well, as I was fortunate enough to have a birthday party a week ago, and I got up and made a short little speech and brought to mind the changes in the world since my birth in 1925. I told them then about the man that came every Sunday or summer, ringing a little bell and carrying over his shoulder the tools of his trade. And one of them sharpened scissors and knives, and one of them sharpened or fixed umbrellas. Remember the old song, Toodalumma Lumma? Any umbrellas to fix today? He did this, and all the housewives would come out with the things that they needed fixed and repaired and so on. And then, of course, as was mentioned earlier, the Iceman. And the kids loved that because we followed the truck all around. And when the Iceman chipped big chunks of ice out, and they would go flying out, we would have pieces of newspaper wrap around the ice and run around sucking on those ice things like it was a big treat. And this was probably 1930 to 40.
So you were like 6 years old?
Yeah, look to what we have now. As I was mentioning then, we can sit in our own living rooms and be in Northern California to see the dreadful fires there, be it in the streets of London when something is going on there. All the things across the world in minutes of what is happening, and all these things have transpired during this 100 years. It's almost unbelievable to me, the changes that I have seen in the years that I have been here.
Yeah, well, it's just like our friend Dave that's here with us today. He mentioned that you don't realize that you're somewhat of a celebrity on the internet, with the poems that you've been reading.
That is amazing to me. Again, just the internet is amazing to me. Just the fact that, my voice and yours, of course, are carrying who knows the boundaries. And it's like David mentioned a few minutes ago, but you hear the word and you have no idea that how much the audience may carry it far away from the place where it was first heard, like the ripples on a stream.
Yeah.
And, of course, unfortunately, that applies sometimes to bad news as well as good. But it's certainly true. World news is at our fingertips at all times now.
Well, I'm somewhat excited because, when this began with your poem reading and your poetry, I used to kid you about being your manager.
Right.
And I always tried to prompt you to make sure you let everybody know that nobody else could be your manager except me.
And I offered you the 10%.
Yeah, exactly.
And you still are as rich as you ever were.
That's okay. Well, maybe in the sense of monetary, not so much, but I'm a lot richer since you've been part of our lives.
Well, I certainly am a lot richer, too, simply because I never realized that it could be carried on in any way other than what I had in the past, just the people I knew, and were related to and so on. doing things with cards, on birthdays and Christmases, and sending him little notes and things like that. And you and Carol both were so kind as to be interested enough in my writing that you encouraged me. And I sort of started a new career at about 97 or 98.
That's right. Well, I remember the first time I asked the pastor here at Wildwood, Brother Liptak. I said to him, I know this lady that writes poetry, and I think that at that point he was sort of like, oh boy,
I'm excited to hear that.
So I gave him one of your poems to read, and as soon as he read the poem, he knew something was up, and so his question to me was, because I had made mention that you were 98 at that time, and he said to me, he said, well, is she okay? And I said, yeah, she's okay. And I said, you mean being able to speak or hold a microphone? And he said, yes, And I said, well, let me, and I told Noah this morning. I said, well, let's put it this way. I said, you know how you preach and you know how I preach. And I said, she's probably better than both of us put together. So.
He was afraid I was drooling on my bib.
Yeah. And I had to explain that you weren't. So.
Well, it is kind of hard to believe that somebody that old isn't.
Yeah, well, and then he once he realized that I think he took my word for
Mm-hmm.
and then he had me invite you to come with me. And then you read a couple poems that Sunday.
Yeah, well, he gave me a chance anyway.
Yeah, he did. And I've been able to open up some other doors for you in other places too.
Oh yes,
so.
And I've told you before, my grandson, who is captain in the Army, Cameron, of all the family members and so on, everybody's just always accepted the fact that I had this little idiosyncrasy of writing these things all the time, but nobody ever raised an eyebrow or even paid a lot of attention. And Cameron, out of all this, became the one who really enjoyed the poetry and became my advocate. And he took all my poems, and he put them into a big book. Between he and Sue, he typed them all up, and she put them into book form, and he categorized them, and he duns people all over the country that publish religious material with my poems, and many have accepted them and put them in their publications, and between the two of you. You have made me semi-famous.
Well, we were talking the other night about things that you remembered from, going
past.
In the past. And you mentioned to me about the American Legion and things that you used to do there with the Poppy. I think it was Poppy Day.
Yes. It was a yearly event, and all the children that their fathers had been in World War I. As I was telling you, it seemed there was a real brotherhood after the First World War among the veterans, and there were Legion groups all over the country. Ours in Beaver Falls, well, there's still one down in Beaver Falls. It used to be in the city building for years. It's no longer there. And it was very active, and the veterans of that war were very influential in the country because they were so much of a brotherhood that, and a lot of them that survived ran for office later, and they were very influential. They were very, very patriotic men. And our life in those days, my dad was very active in the American Legion. My mother was in the auxiliary. And as children, when they had meetings really the women's meetings. Most of the children were there, and we became acquainted. But every year, the women took a couple weeks and they made these crepe paper red poppies to celebrate Poppy Day, which was in a tribute to the poem, and I can't even tell you who wrote that ancient poem. It goes, "In Flanders fields where poppies grow, between the crosses row on row," and then it goes on, and this was true, where this massive funeral or massive burial place was in France, and I believe it was Belgium. Anyway, they made actually these were beautiful, even though they were only crepe paper, and they gave each of us, the children, a big bouquet of paper poppies, and we took them down to the main street of Beaver Falls, and we're on corners in the middle of the block, or if we knew our own little neighborhood and it was downtown, and we felt we had lots of customers in neighbors who would buy from us, and we sold poppies. We carried a little old-fashioned, like a paper. It used to be an ice cream container in the old days, and they put a slit in the top where you could put your change in, and we sold the poppies, and the money was used for veterans' hospitals and things of that nature. And they gave us all lunch, and they sent us back down again in the afternoon, and we were down there as long as it took to
get rid of
all our poppies, and it was a big day,
Yeah.
And, of course, Veterans Day then, of course, and still is for that matter, in November when the First World War ended, November 18th was Armistice Day. And it was always very near to Armistice Day when we would do this, like the closest Saturday to Armistice Day. And it was, my dad always marched in the parades. Just as a soldier, they didn't all dress up in their uniforms from the First World War, but they had little what they called forage caps, and they would wear them. And every town in the county took a turn
having a parade,
hosting the Armistice Day
really? Parade.
And we would be, sometimes it would be in Midland, sometimes it would be in New Brighton, Beaver Falls, and it was all, for years, it was a traditional thing to have that, and the whole county really took part in it, and every high school band in the county would be there, as well as our own American Legion had a band.
Oh, really?
We had a band for years, and some of the other legions did too in those days, and I can remember so many activities like that having to do with patriotism and love of country and the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I met you in, like, I call you my longtime friend, means that I met you in I think it was around 1986 when I went to see your husband.
Oh, yes. Yes, well, my husband was dying of cancer, and his family, certainly a very traditional family in Beaver Falls, but they did not, I won't say that they did not have any religious background. I know that my mother-in-law did, and as a child and even as a young person, her family belonged to a church from the town where she lived. I don't know about my father-in-law. I don't know what his background was, but I have a feeling it was Lutheran somewhere along the line. And they did go to the a little church up there on the edge of 11th Street, and we always called it the Little German Church. Mm-hmm. It was just called the Congregational Church, but that was the church, if they had any connection with, that they supported. You're talking about
Grandpap Ohnezeit.
Yeah, and so on. But the family, my husband's family, as far as I know, they never took them to Sunday schools or had any. I've never seen any indication that And from my husband, I'm sure he knew nothing about the Bible stories that a lot of kids grew up with when I
Right.
was young, and or the other brothers. But I was concerned, naturally. He never had any negative feelings about it at all. And I brought the kids up and took them to church on Sundays and Sunday school and the whole 9 yards. And he didn't go, but he never failed to attend anything they were involved in the church. Christmas programs, Easter, the whole gambit. And I was concerned because I knew that he had already been through a long treatment for radiation, and then they had to go into chemo, and I knew then that he was not going to be around too long. And I didn't even know John or anything about him, but he and my son Rick were friends, and apparently Rick approached him and asked him, told him about his dad and my concern and so on. And he came with his mentor, I believe, at that time,
Pastor Cooper.
to the hospital.
Pastor Cooper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And he spoke to Ken, and they sat and talked, and they led him in the sinner's prayer, and it was just like a great load had gone
Off your
off
shoulders.
my mind.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yes. And
well, it was good that I was in the right place at the right time.
You certainly were. You certainly were.
And I told you the other night I'm going to be preaching on Good Friday, and I get to use the one of the last sayings that he said on the cross there, and that was that you'll be with me in paradise today.
Yes.
So I think that you can be assured that even though he didn't have that background that we...
Yes, he confessed his belief, and that was, as I say, it was just like the weight of the world came off my shoulders at that time. It was a wonderful... one wonderful day when that happened.
Well, it's a good thing Rick and I went back a long way.
Oh, yes, I'll say. Yeah, I'll say.
And part of my crazy days, Rick was part of my crazy days.
Rick's a piece of work.
That's Rick. Rick is Ada's son. But it was a good thing he came along and asked.
Oh my gosh! And it's something too that even the people that are closest to you and that you love sometimes are capable of doing things that you never would dream they would do.
That's right.
And I would have never thought of him doing that.
Who, Ricky?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad he did. Anyway.
Oh, I certainly am. I certainly am.
And I remember you telling me about you going to a camp when you were young.
Oh, the Hall Rock Campground.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that was down near Toronto, Ohio, and that was part of the Free Methodist Church.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother and her sister, my great aunt, or my aunt from Toronto, they owned a cottage there. And even if you owned a cottage there, you could not be there at any time of the year except the 6 weeks in summer when they had
their camp.
The campgrounds going. You could go 2 weeks before, and the 2 weeks went on, 2 weeks afterwards. And after that, the gates were closed, and whether you owned it or didn't own it or rented it, you were not welcome there to stay, because there was nobody else, and it was quite a big area. And I always remember driving in. At one time, you had to drive across a creek. I don't know whether it was the same one that kept coming back across the country roads that led up to it. But you had to drive through the creek 13 times to get there. And when you pulled into the gate, there was a big sign that says, "Satan's pills are sugar-coated." I read that when I was a kid. I never got over that. And all over the whole area, on trees or posts or whatever, there'd be scripture references, and things of that nature. There was no electricity there at all. We had little, what do you call them? Lamps with the globes. I can't even think of them. And they had electricity in the area, and the whole tabernacle had electricity.
But not the
But in the
campsite.
houses, there was no electricity.
So you were really camping, even though you had a cottage.
And had the old gas lanterns or lights and oil lamps. And I always remember half the family on that side of the family, my dad's people, would come sometimes on weekends. And I remember when they came down, there was limited sleeping space, and there was a huge trunk in the front room, and I used to sleep on top of that trunk. And they would fold several blankets so I wasn't laying on the rivets. but all the sleeping space was kind of taken up.
Oh,
Even
really?
on the porch, they would sleep. It was an open porch, but it had long awnings on it.
So they had quite a few people at the camp.
And my uncle and aunt, the aunt that was half owner with my grandmother, I think her family would have made it crowd all by itself, and we had great fun with the kids. We thought it was wonderful fun to be there. We loved the oil, it was a total novelty, and they also had a children's tavern here. Wow, they had a children's little group there, and there were two ladies that always ran that. Always remembered that they were called the Mackey sisters, and one of them was a great singer. She was fantastic, and the other kind of ran the Bible study and so forth for youngsters up to 12, which was a nice thing. And I always remember one of them because she went all through the group one afternoon after we would head to service, and she was asking us all if we were saved. Well, I had never been confronted with that before, and I was totally at a loss to know whether I was saved or not. And I said, well, I've been baptized. Does that count?
It's funny.
She decided that it counted, and they let me come back.
Well, that's
If I'd
good.
been unsaved, I don't know whether I would have been allowed to go back or not.
So, not to change the subject, but you have been writing poetry ever since I've known you. But when did that begin? When did
The first poem I ever wrote that I recall was I was in second grade, because I remember the teacher that I showed it to. I had I walked to school. It was about 3/4 of a mile from our house in Pleasant View to the old Pleasant View schoolhouse. When I was walking to school, it was little houses on either side of the road going to school. But there was one little area that had not been claimed for housing, and it was like a small woods. It wasn't very large, probably about maybe 3 plots of what would be a area for a house. But there were tall trees in there yet, and there were flowers in the spring. And it was just a quiet little place that just had footpaths through it. And I went that way when I went to school, and I always liked it in the spring and the fall usually. And as I say, it had old-fashioned wildflowers like violets and things of that nature that came up early in the spring.
so
That was the first thing that I ever wrote, and I said, there's a little path through the forest, and it's there I love to go, just to pick the pretty violets and the lilies white as snow. And I took that after I wrote it, and I showed it to my second grade teacher. And she said to me, "Well, Ada, that's pretty good. That is really nice." And so I was all pleased, you know, and I took it home and showed my mother. And that's the first time I remember actually sitting
Writing
down and
something.
writing it. And from that time on, mainly it was just casual things, you know. I'd write things to my friends. We used to have things called little autograph books we passed around. Everybody had an autograph
And
book.
you would write a
You
poem.
write your name in it. You write some comment in it or whatever. And I always had something I'd make up to write in them and things like that.
Was it poetic?
Yes, yes, it was always was poetic. I was a great rhymer, and
Well,
but
and then you told me at one time nobody really took you seriously.
well, nobody had, you know, everybody just accepted whatever I did, and they'd laugh if it was funny, or
I see.
they'd say, "Hey, that was a nice sentiment," or whatever like that. But that's it. Subject closed, and nobody ever said to me and my family, "Have you written anything lately?" or anything like that. And I got into the work in the school district. My first job, which was an office job during the war, World War II, there was no time for anything like this. It was all work. But when I was working in the school district, what I got into was making programs because I can draw also. And,
I know that.
yeah, and I used to make different covers for programs, and then I used to. Whatever the group that was meeting or whatever the play was or the show was that was going on, I would write something about it and put it in the book. Well, everybody knew that I do that, and they would talk about it at school.
I see.
And they would say, "Hey, I need a program for a group that's meeting next week or whatever. Could you come up with something?" And I would do this. And so I did a lot of that. A lot of the old poems that I saved were things I made were strictly for the school, like encouraging the kids to study more, to attain more, to have ambition, that type of thing.
Right.
And so I was developing it in those school years, and that was 15 years. And in church, I did that sort of thing all the time. If they needed music for something, and they didn't have anything brand new, and had something that they liked from the past, I would rewrite the lyric, and we'd use the same, and the choir would know the music to begin with.
Really?
And I would write it for the subject that they needed, and I did this sort of thing in church a lot.
Well, I know a couple times you've written poems for. I don't know whether you remember this or not, but remember when Larry Linta, the fellow that was in the wheelchair,
Yes.
and his cousin passed, and
Yes.
he asked me if I thought that you could write a poem for his cousin because he was so in such despair that he thought maybe you could do something in that regard of cheering him up with a poem, and I said, I'm not sure, and at this time. I didn't know whether you would be able to do, because I knew you did things, in the religious aspect, for
Yes.
me, when I would ask you to do something, but I didn't know whether you would be able to do it not knowing this person. And he told me a couple things about him, and then you wrote this poem, and I gave it to him, and he told me that this is what he said. He said, the poem was so in liking with what was going on in his life that it was like you knew him almost all of his life with the poem that you wrote for him.
Well, that was great that I managed to do that then.
Well, I'm saying
yeah.
I've seen that more than once. With you doing.
Well,
your
there are
poetry.
times when I'm writing something, anything, even the more trivial things, and I get stuck. and I just am not doing well, and I feel like it's something that's just out of my grasp. If I could just think of the word or whatever, and I say to the good Lord, "Give me the words, Lord," and He does. Seriously, I've had poems that I wrote that I almost felt like He dictated them to me.
Well, I know you wrote a poem for me, and I told Dave and Noah this morning about the poem Beans that you knew that I was the 13th child, and,
Oh, yeah.
and you wrote a poem for me on my birthday about the number 13, and it was so appropriate that I keep that poem in a little packet of poems that you've written, that you wrote for Carol and I, and that one in particular, I usually use that if I'm going to try to get someone to get you to read poems. Well, I usually use that poem to show them how, and even in that poem, even though it's a fun poem, there's an eloquence about it and it really sets the tone for me as a person being the 13th child in my family.
Well, I'm so glad that you enjoyed that poem, and
well, that's one of the many, but that's one that always
yeah.
stands out, and I think it's a great one to sort of introduce you to other people that don't know you.
I think that, as I say, I have gotten so much help from the Lord. I'm sure He helps me with all of them, but some specific help on several occasions when somebody has asked me to write a poem specifically for some situation, and it's just remarkable when it happens. It is. A couple of those, it was almost as fast as I could write it down. I know that sounds almost ridiculous, but it's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I could write a poem in 20 minutes, I mean, I don't think that I'm, the writer of the century by a long shot. But even simple poems sometimes take a while.
Mm-hmm.
But when something hits you like that and all of a sudden you're just writing line after line fast, it's almost unbelievable.
It's amazing.
And it is. It is.
Well, it's been a joy for me in the time that I've been able to be in your presence and have you attend our church for as long as you did. And how long were you in? This sort of helps people, or might help people. How long were you in the church previous to coming to our church?
Well, I was carried into the First Christian Church in Beaver Falls in 1925 sometime. That's the year of my birth. And I was in all the cradle roll department and the mid group and elementary and all that. And at age 11, then I went forward with some young people in my own class and made the good confession. I was baptized, and I liked the church so well, I stayed for 79 more years.
79 years. Well, that's a great witness, because there are so many people today that either don't go to church at all, and then when people do go to church, they never can be satisfied, no matter whether the church is what it needs to be or not, because people are always moving.
And there's always bickering, no matter what happens. one group against another sometimes. Somebody wants something even for the church, and someone else thinks, no, we shouldn't have it yet, whatever. There's always some kind of an undercurrent going on. Where people are, you're going to have it. It doesn't make any difference.
Right.
But if you can hang in there.
But 79 years of being in one church is really a truly a witness.
You can imagine how many pastors I have known over that many years. And,
you mean coming to the church?
Oh, yes. And there was we'd have pastors that'd be there for 10 or 12 years, and then something would happen, and they would die, or they would move on somewhere else, and then maybe the next one was only there for 2 years or something. As I say, there was a lot of changes from 1925 to 2015 when the church closed. And then I said to Rick, let's go over and listen to John Maruka. I've never heard him preach. And he had been trying to get him to go to church anyhow for a long time. And he said, that's a good idea. And we went over. And
and the rest is history.
We didn't leave soon.
And the rest
I
is
ended
history.
up being the treasurer.
Yeah, exactly. I made you my treasurer.
I headed straight for the money.
Oh yeah, that was a lot. But it was great having you there. I can tell you that much.
Oh, it was a wonderful experience. If I had only just met you and Carol, it would have been a great experience. But we had a friendly group, and it was just very satisfying. I think I read the Bible more after I came to your church than I had ever done before, and I was a fairly steady customer of reading the Bible, and it was a very great experience for me, and certainly was for Brick too.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But we're here today to do something, and that is for you to read some more poetry. So you think you're ready to do that?
Well, I've been working on some poems since the last group, which was really the third group. This would be the fourth
right
now, and I'm hoping that you'll think they're good. And I'll do my best to make them that way.
Okay, good.